I thought I was getting a jewelry box for our 20th anniversary. Instead, I got divorce papers that my husband had been secretly signing for months. My name is Diana, and this is how I discovered that the man I'd given everything to had been planning my destruction while I was planning our celebration. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Let me paint you a picture of that morning. It was April 15th, 2023, our anniversary. I woke up at 5:30 a.m., just like I had every day for the past 20 years. But this day felt different, special. I could hear Rob already moving around downstairs, probably getting his coffee ready before heading to the construction site. For weeks, I'd been planning every detail of this day. 20 years of marriage deserves something memorable. I slipped on my favorite blue robe, the one Rob used to say made my eyes sparkle, and headed to the kitchen. The house was quiet, except for the familiar sounds of morning, the coffee maker gurgling, the newspaper hitting the front door, birds singing outside the window I'd hung cheerful yellow curtains in last spring. Everything felt normal, peaceful, even. If only I'd known that peace was about to shatter into a million pieces. I found Rob sitting at our kitchen table, the same oak table where we'd shared thousands of meals, where our kids Sarah and Marcus had done their homework, where we'd made plans and shared dreams. He was holding a small wooden box, beautifully crafted with intricate carvings on the lid. My heart actually skipped a beat. Oh my God, I thought he remembered. He actually planned something special. "Happy anniversary, sweetheart," he said. But something in his voice felt off. Not warm like I expected, not excited, almost rehearsed, like he'd practiced saying those words in the mirror. But I was so caught up in the moment, so eager to believe that my husband still loved me the way I loved him, that I pushed that feeling aside. "Rob, it's beautiful," I whispered, running my fingers over the smooth wood. "You didn't have to get me anything fancy. I just wanted to spend the day together." I leaned over to kiss his cheek, breathing in his familiar cologne mixed with sawdust, the scent that had meant home to me for 2 decades. "Go ahead," he said, gesturing to the box. "Open it." My hands were actually trembling with excitement. This was it. The moment I'd been dreaming about. Maybe it was the necklace I'd admired in the jewelry store window downtown. Maybe it was something even more special. Something that would prove that despite the distance I'd been feeling between us lately, our marriage was still worth fighting for. I lifted the lid slowly, savoring the moment. Inside, nestled where a beautiful piece of jewelry should have been, were papers, legal documents. My eyes scanned the first page, not quite understanding what I was seeing. "Petition for dissolution of marriage," it read. "Robert Mitchell versus Diana Mitchell." The world stopped. Literally stopped. I could hear my heartbeat thundering in my ears, drowning out every other sound. My hands started shaking. Not with excitement this time, but with shock so profound it felt like my body was rejecting what my eyes were seeing. "Rob," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "What is this?" He couldn't even look at me. This man who had promised to love me in sickness and in health, who had held my hand through my father's funeral, who had celebrated with me when our children were born, couldn't even meet my eyes as my entire world collapsed. "I think it's time we both moved on, Diana," he said quietly. "We've grown apart. You know that." But I didn't know that. I had no idea that while I was planning our anniversary celebration, he was planning my devastation. "You have to understand something about me. I wasn't always the broken woman sitting at that kitchen table. I used to be Diana Hayes, a 3rd-grade teacher who lit up when she talked about helping children learn to read. I had dreams, opinions, and a spine made of steel when it mattered. But somewhere along the way, I became Diana Mitchell, and I thought that was the greatest achievement of my life. When Rob and I got married in 2003, I was 38 and he was 41. We weren't young and foolish. We were mature adults who knew what we wanted. At least I thought we did. Rob had just started his construction company, Mitchell and Sons, even though we didn't have any sons yet. "We will," he'd say with that confident smile that made my heart flutter. "And when we do, they'll have a legacy to inherit." I believed in his dreams so completely that I made it my own. When Sarah was born in 2005, I took a year off from teaching. When Marcus came along 2 years later, Rob sat me down at our kitchen table, the same table where he'd served me divorce papers 15 years later, and said, "Diana, honey, the business is really taking off. I need you home. I need you to be my anchor." "But what about my teaching?" I asked, bouncing baby Marcus on my lap while Sarah colored beside us. "You'll teach again," he promised, kissing my forehead. "When the kids are older, when the business is stable. Right now, I need you to teach our children. I need you to teach me how to be a better man, a better father, a better businessman." How could I say no to that? How could I not want to be the woman who made it all possible? So, I became the architect of our perfect life. I woke up every morning at 5:30 a.m. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I'd make Rob's coffee exactly the way he liked it. 2 sugars, a splash of cream, served in the blue mug his mother had given us as a wedding gift. I'd pack his lunch with little notes tucked inside. "Have a great day, my love," or "You're going to do amazing things today." I turned our house into a sanctuary. The living room with its soft beige couches and family photos arranged just so. The kitchen where I'd spend hours perfecting new recipes, trying to surprise him with his favorite meals. The garden where I grew tomatoes and herbs because Rob once mentioned that his grandmother's tomatoes were the best he'd ever tasted. I managed every detail of our children's lives with the precision of a military operation. Sarah's soccer practices, Marcus' piano lessons, school events, doctor appointments, birthday parties. I coordinated it all while Rob built his business. When clients called the house, I'd answer with a cheerful, "Mitchell Construction. This is Diana. How can I help you?" I became his unofficial secretary, his bookkeeper, his marketing department. "I don't know how you do it all," our neighbor, Carol, would say, watching me load the kids into the car for another after-school activity. "You're like supermom and superwife rolled into one." I'd laugh and wave it off, but inside I glowed. That was exactly what I wanted to be. I wanted to be indispensable. I wanted to be the woman who made everything possible. Friday nights were sacred in our house. That was date night, our time to reconnect as a couple. We drop the kids at my sister Linda's house and go to dinner at Romano's, the little Italian place where we'd had our first date. Rob would tell me about his latest projects, the challenges he was facing, the clients he was trying to land. I'd listen with rapt attention, asking questions, offering suggestions, celebrating his victories like they were my own. Because they were my own. His success was my success. His happiness was my happiness. I had no idea that while I was building our life, I was slowly erasing myself. "We make a good team," Rob would say, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "I couldn't do any of this without you." I lived for those words. I lived for the validation that I was essential, that I mattered, that I was loved. I had no idea that love could be so quietly conditional, so easily withdrawn, so carefully planned for termination. Looking back now, I realize I wasn't living my life. I was performing it. Every morning I'd put on the costume of the perfect wife and mother. And I'd forgotten that underneath there was still a woman named Diana Hayes who had dreams of her own. But in those moments, in that beautiful false security, I was blissfully unaware that perfection is often just another word for invisible. The first crack in my perfect world appeared on a Tuesday evening in January, 3 months before our anniversary. I remember it was Tuesday because that was always pasta night, Rob's favorite. I'd spent the afternoon making his grandmother's marinara sauce from scratch, the one with the secret ingredient of red wine that she'd whispered to me at our wedding reception. The whole house smelled like garlic and basil, warm and inviting. Rob had been working late more often lately, coming home after 8 p.m. instead of his usual 6:30. When I asked about it, he'd just shrug and say, "Business is picking up. You know how it is." I didn't know how it was, or at least I thought I did. Construction work was unpredictable, and Rob had always been dedicated to his clients. I admired that about him. That particular evening, I heard his truck pull into the driveway around 8:45. I quickly drained the pasta, arranged everything on his favorite plate, the blue ceramic one we'd bought on our honeymoon in Italy, and walked toward his home office with a smile on my face. He'd been using the spare bedroom as his office for years, and I'd made it comfortable for him. A sturdy desk, good lighting, a small refrigerator stocked with his favorite sodas. "Hey, honey," I called out cheerfully as I approached the door. "I made your favorite pasta with Nona's marinara sauce. I thought you might want to eat while you finish up." I balanced the warm plate in one hand and knocked gently with the other. Through the slightly open door, I could see him hunched over his laptop, typing intently. The screen's blue glow illuminated his face, and I noticed something I'd never seen before, a look of concentration mixed with something else, guilt, anxiety. At the time, I couldn't put my finger on it. "Rob, dinner's ready," I said, pushing the door open with my hip. The reaction was immediate and shocking. The moment he heard my voice, he slammed the laptop shut with such force that I actually jumped. His head snapped up, and the look in his eyes wasn't the warm welcome I'd expected after a long day. It was irritation. Pure, undiluted irritation at my presence. "Can't you see I'm busy?" he snapped, his voice sharp in a way that made me step back. "Just leave it on the desk." I stood there for a moment, holding the plate, completely thrown off balance. In 20 years of marriage, through stress and exhaustion and difficult days, Rob had never spoken to me like that. Even when work was overwhelming, even when money was tight, he'd always been grateful for my thoughtfulness. A simple thank you or "you're an angel" was usually his response. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, setting the plate down carefully on the corner of his desk away from his papers. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I just thought you might be hungry." He didn't even look up at me. "I am hungry. That's why I asked you to leave the food and go." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You didn't ask me to leave the food, Rob. You just told me you were busy." He finally looked at me then, and what I saw in his eyes made my stomach drop. There was no warmth, no recognition of the woman who had spent her afternoon making his favorite meal. There was just annoyance, as if I were a waitress who had lingered too long at his table. "Diana, I have a lot of work to do. Can we please not turn this into a big discussion?" "I'm not trying to turn it into anything," I replied, my voice smaller than I intended. "I was just bringing you dinner." "Well, you brought it. Thank you. Now, can I please get back to work?" I nodded, feeling tears threaten behind my eyes. "Of course, I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything." As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of his reflection in the dark window behind his desk. The moment I stepped out of the room, his shoulders relaxed, and he opened his laptop again. But what struck me most was the speed with which he'd closed it when I entered. It wasn't the natural closing of someone finishing a task. It was the panic slam of someone hiding something. I walked back to the kitchen in a daze, my mind racing. What had he been looking at that required such secrecy? Work emails? Construction plans? Since when did Rob hide his work from me? I'd been helping him with his business for years, handling calls, organizing files, even sitting in on client meetings when he needed support. I sat at our kitchen table, staring at my own untouched plate of pasta. The sauce that had smelled so wonderful an hour ago now seemed to congeal before my eyes. I kept replaying the moment, trying to understand what had just happened. The man who had kissed me goodbye that morning, who had texted me, "Love you," around lunchtime, had just treated me like an unwelcome stranger. "He's just stressed," I whispered to myself. The same excuse I'd been making for his increasing distance lately. The business is growing. He's under pressure. But even as I said the words, something deep in my chest felt different. For the first time in our marriage, I felt like I was lying to myself. And that feeling, that tiny seed of doubt, would grow into something I couldn't ignore. I should have trusted that instinct. I should have asked more questions. Instead, I did what I'd always done. I made excuses for the man I loved, even when he stopped making excuses for hurting me. What happened next wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a single devastating blow that would have forced me to confront reality. Instead, it was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Small wounds that accumulated over weeks until I was bleeding from places I didn't even know existed. The morning after the pasta incident, I woke up determined to pretend it hadn't happened. Rob was already in the shower, So I went downstairs and made his coffee exactly the way he liked it, packed his lunch with a little note that said, "Hope you have a wonderful day," and set everything out on the counter like I had every morning for 20 years. When he came down, dressed in his work clothes with his hair still damp, I smiled brightly. "Good morning, honey. Your coffee is ready. And I packed you that turkey sandwich you love." He grabbed the coffee mug without looking at me, took a sip, and made a face. "It's too strong today." I felt my stomach clench. I made it exactly the same way I always do. 2 sugars, a splash of cream. "Well, it doesn't taste the same." He poured half of it down the sink and added more cream. "Maybe pay attention to what you're doing next time." The words echoed in my head long after his truck disappeared down our street. In 20 years of marriage, Rob had never criticized my coffee. He'd always said it was perfect, that no one could make it quite like me. But I tried harder. The next morning, I measured everything precisely, timing the brewing to the second. When he tasted it, he just shrugged. "Better," he said, but not like it was actually good, just adequate. It became a pattern. Nothing I did was quite right anymore. The toast was too dark, then too light. The eggs were overcooked, then undercooked. When I folded his shirts, the creases weren't sharp enough. When I organized his desk, I'd messed up his system. "You burned the toast again," he said one morning, pushing the plate away with genuine disgust. "It's barely golden," I protested, looking at what appeared to be perfectly normal toast. "Diana, look at it. Really look at it. Those are burn marks." I stared at the toast, wondering if I was losing my mind. What I saw looked normal, but Rob was looking at it like I'd serve him charcoal. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "I'll make you new toast. Don't bother. I'll grab something on the way to work." I threw the toast away and stood at the kitchen counter, fighting back tears. When had I become so incompetent? When had the woman who used to manage a classroom of 33rd graders lost the ability to make breakfast? The criticism extended beyond the kitchen. When I suggested we have dinner at Romano's for our upcoming anniversary, Rob looked at me like I'd suggested we eat garbage. "That place? Diana? We're not 25 anymore. Don't you think we should try somewhere more sophisticated?" The word sophisticated stung. Romano's was our place. It was where we'd had our first date, where we'd celebrated every anniversary, where Rob had proposed. Suddenly, it wasn't good enough anymore, and by extension, neither was I. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "Where would you like to go?" "I don't know. Just somewhere better." I spent hours researching restaurants, reading reviews, trying to find the perfect place that would meet Rob's new standards. When I presented him with options, he'd find fault with each one. Too expensive, too casual, too far away, too crowded. Nothing was right. Our weekly date nights became a source of anxiety rather than joy. I'd spend the entire day preparing, changing clothes 3 times, second-guessing every choice. When we'd finally go out, Rob would spend the evening looking around the restaurant, checking his phone, seeming bored by my company. "You're not very talkative tonight," I'd say, trying to start a conversation.
"I'm tired, Diana."
"I work hard all day. Sometimes, I just want to eat in peace." Eat in peace. As if my presence, my attempt at conversation, was disturbing his peace. I started editing myself, choosing my words carefully, trying to be more interesting, more engaging. I'd prepare topics to discuss, stories to share, questions to ask about his work, but everything I said seemed to fall flat. He'd respond with one-word answers or change the subject entirely. "How was the Johnson project today?" I'd ask.
"Fine."
"Did you get the materials you needed?" "Yeah." "The weather's been perfect for outdoor work, hasn't it?" "I guess." I felt like I was talking to a stranger. Worse, I felt like I was bothering a stranger who wished I would just stop talking altogether. The worst part was how he'd act around other people. At neighborhood barbecues or family gatherings, he'd be charming, attentive, funny, the man I'd fallen in love with. But the moment we were alone, that mask would slip, and I'd be left with someone who seemed to find my very existence irritating. "You were so quiet at dinner tonight," our friend Janet mentioned to me after one of our couple's nights out. "Are you feeling okay?" How could I explain that I was afraid to speak because everything I said seemed to annoy my husband? How could I tell her that the man who used to hang on my every word now acted like my voice was background noise he wished he could turn off? "I'm fine," I said, the lie that was becoming my default response. "Just tired." But I wasn't fine. I was disappearing one small criticism at a time, one dismissive gesture at a time, one moment of invisible contempt at a time. The woman who used to have opinions, who used to make decisions, who used to matter, was slowly being erased. And the most heartbreaking part was that I was helping him do it. The breaking point came on a Saturday evening in March at our friends Tom and Janet's house. They were celebrating Janet's 50th birthday, and half the neighborhood was there. I'd been looking forward to it for weeks. Not because I was particularly excited about the party, but because it had been so long since Rob and I had gone anywhere together where he seemed genuinely happy to be with me. I'd spent extra time getting ready that evening, choosing a navy blue dress that Rob used to say was his favorite, the one that brought out my eyes. I'd done my hair in the soft waves he'd always complimented, applied makeup carefully, and even worn the perfume he'd given me for Christmas. When I came downstairs, I felt pretty for the first time in months. "You look nice," Rob said, barely glancing up from his phone. Not beautiful or stunning, like he used to say. Just nice. The same word you might use to describe a decent cup of coffee or a pleasant day. The party was in full swing when we arrived. Tom had set up a bar in their backyard, and neighbors were scattered across the patio, laughing and catching up. For a moment, watching Rob immediately brighten as he greeted our friends, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this would be good for us. Maybe being around other people would remind him of who we used to be together. I was standing near the dessert table talking with Carol from down the street when the conversation turned to upcoming anniversaries. Carol mentioned that she and her husband were planning a weekend getaway for their 15th anniversary. "That sounds wonderful," I said, genuinely excited. "Rob and I have our 20th anniversary coming up in a few weeks." 20 years? Can you believe it? 20 years. Carol exclaimed. "That's amazing, Diana. What are you two planning?" "Something special, I hope." I felt my entire face light up. This was my moment to share the joy I'd been carrying around for months. "Well, I've been planning this incredible celebration. I've made reservations at the Grand View Hotel. You know, that beautiful place overlooking the lake. They have this anniversary package with champagne, rose petals, and a candlelit dinner. And I've been saving up to buy Rob this gorgeous watch he's been admiring. It's going to be perfect." I was speaking faster than usual, my excitement bubbling over. "I've also been putting together this photo album of our entire relationship from our first date all the way through the kids' graduations. I found our old love letters and some ticket stubs from concerts we went to. I even tracked down a bottle of the same wine we had at our wedding." "Diana, that sounds absolutely magical," Carol said. "Rob is so lucky to have someone who puts so much thought into celebrating your love story." Other women had started gathering around us, drawn by the enthusiasm in my voice. I felt like myself again, the woman who used to light up rooms, who used to have stories worth telling, who used to matter. "You know what the best part is?" I continued, my voice getting softer with emotion. "I found the napkin from our first date at Romano's. Rob had written 'Call me tomorrow' on it, and I kept it all these years. I'm going to frame it and give it to him with his gift." I was so caught up in sharing my plans that I didn't notice Rob approaching from behind until I heard his voice cutting through the warm evening air like a blade. "Diana's always been the romantic one," he said, his tone carrying an edge that made the women around me shift uncomfortably. "She lives in this fantasy world where everything's perfect and meaningful." The group fell silent. I turned around to face my husband, confusion and hurt flooding through me. "Rob, I was just telling them about our anniversary plans." "Plans I didn't know about," he said with a cold laugh. "The hotel, the watch, the photo album. When exactly were you planning to consult me about any of this?" My face burned with embarrassment. "I wanted it to be a surprise. I thought you'd be happy." "Happy?" Rob's voice got louder, drawing attention from other partygoers. "Diana, we're not 25 anymore. This whole elaborate romantic gesture thing is getting a little much, don't you think?" I could feel every eye in the group on me. Janet stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable. Rob, I think it sounds lovely that Diana puts so much thought into. That's the problem, Rob interrupted, his voice dripping with condescension. She puts too much thought into things that don't matter. She's always been dramatic like this. Remember when she cried at Sarah's graduation? Or when she made that huge deal about our first grandchild potentially being born on Christmas? Everything has to be this big emotional production. I felt like I was shrinking into the ground. The women around me were staring at their drinks, at their shoes, anywhere but at me. This was my husband, the man who had once told me that my big heart was what made him fall in love with me, now publicly mocking me for the very qualities he used to cherish. I'm not dramatic, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I just love celebrating the important moments. See, Rob gestured to me like I was proving his point. This is exactly what I mean. She turns everything into a crisis. It's exhausting. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear music playing from the house, people laughing in other parts of the yard, but our little circle had become a bubble of mortification. Carol finally spoke up, her voice tight with anger. Rob, I think you're being unfair. Diana was just sharing something she was excited about. Diana gets excited about everything, Rob replied dismissively. It's like living with a golden retriever sometimes. The comparison hit me like a physical blow. A golden retriever. Overeager, annoying, too much. That's how my husband saw me. I excused myself and walked to the bathroom, where I locked the door and stared at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was a stranger, deflated, humiliated, smaller somehow than she'd been an hour ago. The navy blue dress that had made me feel pretty now felt like a costume I had no right to wear. When I returned to the party, I stayed close to Rob's side, barely speaking for the rest of the evening. Every time someone tried to engage me in conversation, I'd give short, polite responses, afraid that anything more would be seen as too much or dramatic. That night, lying in bed, I replayed the evening over and over. Rob was already asleep, snoring softly beside me like nothing had happened. But something fundamental had shifted inside me. For the first time in our marriage, I felt genuinely ashamed of who I was. The woman who used to make elaborate birthday parties for her children, who used to surprise Rob with thoughtful gifts, who used to find joy in celebrating love, that woman had been publicly ridiculed by the person who was supposed to protect her heart. I realized then that I'd been making excuses for cruelty, calling it stress or fatigue or anything except what it actually was: contempt. My husband held me in contempt, and he was no longer bothering to hide it. The night before our anniversary, I couldn't sleep. I'd been tossing and turning for hours, my mind racing between excitement and dread. Despite everything that had happened over the past few months, the criticism, the distance, the humiliation at Janet's party, I still held on to a thread of hope that our anniversary would somehow reset everything. Maybe celebrating 20 years together would remind Rob of what we'd built, what we meant to each other. At 2:47 a.m., I gave up on sleep and padded downstairs in my bare feet to get a glass of water. The house was dark and quiet, the kind of peaceful silence that used to comfort me. But as I passed the kitchen window, I noticed a faint light coming from the garage, Rob's workshop. It was unusual for him to be out there so late, especially on a work night. I slipped on my garden shoes and walked across the dewy grass to investigate. The side door to the garage was slightly ajar, and through the crack, I could see Rob sitting on his workbench, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was low, almost whispered. But in the stillness of the night, I could hear every word. No, she doesn't suspect anything, he was saying. She's been running around all week planning some elaborate celebration. It's actually perfect timing. My heart stopped. I pressed myself against the outside wall, hidden in the shadows, straining to hear more. Tomorrow it'll all be over, Rob continued. I'll give her the papers, and we can move forward with the next phase. You said the house evaluation would be ready by Friday. There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. Good. And you're sure about the alimony calculations? I don't want her getting more than absolutely necessary. 20 years of marriage. Yeah, but she hasn't worked. She's been completely dependent on me. That should work in our favor, right? The words hit me like ice water. Alimony calculations, house evaluation, papers. This wasn't about work stress or growing apart. This was planned. This was calculated. This was deliberate. I know it seems harsh, Rob said, his voice carrying a tone I'd never heard before, cold, businesslike, efficient. But Diana's always been too emotional, too needy. She smothers everything. I can't breathe around her anymore. I felt my knees wobble. I had to grip the garage wall to keep from falling. Trust me, this is the right thing for both of us. She'll be devastated at first, but she'll get over it. She always does. And I'll finally be free to, well, the way he said, made my stomach turn. There was someone else. Of course, there was someone else. This wasn't just about Rob wanting out of our marriage. This was about Rob wanting into something else. Someone else. I have to go, Rob said suddenly. I think I heard something. I panicked and quickly crept back to the house, my heart pounding so loudly, I was sure he could hear it across the yard. I made it to the kitchen just as the garage light went out. Within minutes, I heard the back door open and Rob's footsteps on the stairs. I stood in our kitchen, the kitchen where I'd made thousands of meals, where our children had taken their first steps, where Rob used to dance with me while dinner was cooking, and felt like a stranger in my own life. When Rob appeared in the doorway, I was standing with my back to him, gripping the edge of the counter. Deanna, what are you doing up? I turned around slowly, studying his face in the dim light from the street lamp outside. He looked normal, concerned, even if I hadn't just heard that phone conversation. I might have thought he was genuinely worried about me. I couldn't sleep, I said quietly. Anniversary excitement, I guess. He walked over and put his hands on my shoulders, the same gesture he'd made thousands of times before. But now it felt like a lie. You should get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be a big day. Yes, I whispered, looking into the eyes of the man I'd given 20 years of my life to. It is. He kissed my forehead, and I had to fight every instinct not to pull away. I love you, Diana. The words were so automatic, so practiced that I wondered how long he'd been saying them without meaning them. How long had he been planning this, while still kissing me goodnight? Still saying he loved me, still letting me plan our anniversary celebration like a fool. I love you too, I replied. Because what else could I say? What else had I ever said? As we walked back upstairs together, Rob's arm around my waist in a gesture that used to make me feel safe, I felt like I was walking to my own execution. Tomorrow, it'll all be over, he'd said. But he was wrong about one thing. This wasn't going to be over. It was going to be the beginning. I lay in bed next to my husband, listening to him breathe, watching the ceiling in the darkness. For 20 years, I'd shared this bed with someone I thought I knew completely. Now I realized I'd been sleeping next to a stranger who had been carefully, methodically planning to destroy me while I planned to celebrate us. The woman who would wake up tomorrow morning was going to be different from the woman lying there now. Because tomorrow, Diana Mitchell was going to discover exactly what her husband thought she was worth, and then she was going to find out what she was actually worth. The morning of our anniversary dawned with the kind of perfect spring weather that felt like a mockery. Bright sunshine streamed through our bedroom windows. Birds were singing in the oak tree Rob had planted when Sarah was born, and everything looked exactly as beautiful and peaceful as I'd imagined our special day would be. I woke up before my alarm, my stomach churning with a mixture of anticipation and the terrible knowledge I'd gained the night before. For a moment, lying there in the early morning light, I considered confronting Rob about the phone conversation. But something held me back, perhaps the last stubborn thread of hope that I'd misunderstood, that there was some other explanation. I slipped out of bed quietly and went downstairs to begin what I thought would be our perfect anniversary morning. I'd planned every detail weeks in advance. Fresh strawberries and cream, his favorite blueberry pancakes made from scratch, the good china we only use for special occasions. I wanted everything to be beautiful, memorable, worthy of 20 years. I arranged the dining room like a shrine to our love story. I'd stayed up until midnight the week before, going through boxes of photos and creating a timeline of our relationship that now covered one entire wall. Our wedding photo in the center, surrounded by pictures from vacations, holidays, the kids' milestones, quiet moments that had meant everything to me. I'd even found the pressed flower from my wedding bouquet and placed it in a small frame next to our wedding rings engraving. The table was set with our wedding china, the delicate pattern with tiny blue roses that we'd registered for but rarely used. I'd polished the silver, ironed the white linen tablecloth, and placed a single red rose in a crystal vase as the centerpiece. Everything gleamed in the morning sunlight streaming through the windows I'd hung with lace curtains on our first anniversary. At exactly 8 a.m., I heard Rob's footsteps on the stairs. My heart was racing as I lit the candles I'd placed around the room, wanting the ambience to be perfect when he walked in. This was our moment. This was where he'd see everything I'd put into celebrating us and remember why we mattered. "Happy anniversary, sweetheart," Rob said as he entered the dining room carrying that wooden box. I looked at him standing there in his Saturday morning clothes, the faded jeans and navy t-shirt I'd bought him last Christmas. And for just a second, I forgot about the phone call. This was my Rob, my husband, holding what I was sure was a thoughtful gift. Maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe I'd misheard. Maybe this was all going to be okay. "Rob, you didn't have to get me anything fancy," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "I just wanted to spend the day together celebrating what we've built." I gestured around the room at the photos, the carefully set table, the evidence of 20 years of love. "Look at everything we've created together. Our children, our home, our life. Isn't it amazing?" "Go ahead," he said. And there was something in his voice that made my hands shake as I reached for the box. "Open it." I lifted the lid with trembling fingers, expecting jewelry, a watch, maybe a heartfelt letter. Instead, nestled in what should have been a space for something precious, were legal documents, official papers with letterheads and signatures, and words that didn't make sense in the context of anniversary gifts. "Petition for dissolution of marriage," I read aloud, my voice barely a whisper. "Robert Mitchell versus Diana Mitchell." The world tilted sideways. I actually felt dizzy, like the floor was moving beneath my feet. I had to grip the edge of the table to keep from falling.
"Rob."
The word came out as a question, a plea, a prayer. "What is this?" But even as I asked, I knew. The phone call, the secrecy, the growing distance, it all crystallized into this moment. This box, these papers that reduced 20 years of my life to legal terminology. I flipped through the pages with numb fingers, seeing his signature again and again, dated weeks and months ago. While I was planning our celebration, he was planning my destruction. While I was choosing which photos best captured our love story, he was meeting with lawyers to end it. The cruelest detail was a handwritten note clipped to the back. "Minimize spousal support. Subject has been financially dependent throughout marriage." Subject: not Diana, not his wife, not the mother of his children. Subject: "I think it's time we both moved on." "Diana," Rob said, his voice matter-of-fact like he was discussing the weather. "We've grown apart. You know that." But I didn't know that.
I didn't know anything.
Apparently, I didn't know that while I was framing our wedding photo, he was calculating the minimum amount he'd have to pay me to go away. I didn't know that while I was polishing our silver, he was meeting with lawyers to divide our assets. I didn't know that while I was pressing flowers and saving ticket stubs and creating a monument to our love, he was systematically dismantling everything I thought we were. I looked around the dining room at the photos of us laughing, dancing, holding our newborn children, building our life together. The candles I'd lit were still burning, casting a warm glow over the anniversary breakfast that would never be eaten. The celebration that would never happen. The love story that had apparently ended months ago, without anyone telling me. 20 years, I whispered, not to him, but to the room, to the photos, to the ghost of the woman I'd been when I woke up that morning. 20 years. I felt something break inside me then. Not just my heart, but something deeper. The foundation of who I thought I was, who I thought we were, who I thought mattered. The woman who had believed that love and devotion and sacrifice meant something. The woman who had thought that building a life together meant you got to keep it. I sat down heavily in the chair I'd set for myself, still holding the papers, surrounded by the evidence of a love that had apparently been one-sided for longer than I could bear to calculate. The strawberries and cream I'd prepared so carefully sat untouched. The candles burned lower, and the perfect spring morning mocked me through the windows I dressed with such care. This was rock bottom. Not anger, not screaming, not drama, just the quiet, devastating realization that I had been living in a completely different marriage than my husband. I had been cherishing what he had been enduring. I had been celebrating what he had been planning to destroy. The saddest part was that even in that moment, surrounded by the ruins of everything I'd believed in, I still wanted to ask him if he wanted pancakes. After Rob left for what he called errands, though I suspected he was giving me time to process his devastating gift, I sat alone in our dining room for what felt like hours. The candles had burned down to stubs. The breakfast I'd lovingly prepared had grown cold, and the anniversary decorations that had seemed so beautiful that morning now felt like a cruel joke. My hands were still shaking as I picked up the wooden box again. Part of me wanted to throw it across the room to watch it shatter against the wall where our wedding photo hung. But something made me examine it more carefully. Rob had never been sentimental about gifts. He usually grabbed something practical from the hardware store or asked me to pick out my own present. This box was different. It was handcrafted, expensive, deliberately chosen. Why would he put divorce papers in something so beautiful? I ran my fingers along the bottom of the box, feeling for anything I might have missed in my initial shock. That's when I noticed it. A slight give in the wood, as if there was a hidden compartment. I pressed gently, and a small section of the bottom slid away, revealing a space I hadn't seen before. Inside were more papers, but these weren't legal documents. These were printouts of emails, and seeing my name in the subject lines made my blood run cold. The first email was dated 4 months ago, addressed to someone named James Peterson at Peterson and Associates law firm.
Jim, it began.
Diana's getting suspicious about my late nights, so we need to move faster on this. What's the minimum I can get away with for spousal support? I felt sick reading it, but I forced myself to continue. Email after email laid out Rob's careful strategy for divorcing me while protecting as much of his assets as possible. But it wasn't just the financial planning that devastated me. It was the language he used to describe me, his wife of 20 years. Diana has never worked outside the home by choice, one email read. She's always been content to be dependent on me financially. I don't think she has any marketable skills at this point. Content to be dependent. I had given up my teaching career because he'd asked me to, because he'd said the business needed me at home, because he'd convinced me that supporting his dreams was the most important thing I could do. Now, he was using my sacrifice as evidence of my worthlessness. Another email dated just 6 weeks ago. The good news is that Diana is completely clueless about our financial situation. She doesn't even know about the second business account or the property investments. She just signs whatever I put in front of her. That was true. I had always trusted Rob completely with our finances. When he'd ask me to sign tax documents or business papers, I'd do it without question. I'd been proud of how much I trusted my husband, how secure I felt in our partnership. Now I realized that trust had been weaponized against me. But the most devastating email was the most recent one sent just 2 days ago. I'm actually looking forward to this being over. Living with Diana has become exhausting. She's so needy, always wanting to talk about feelings or plan occasions. It's like being married to a golden retriever. Just constant, suffocating attention. I need space to breathe. A golden retriever again. The same comparison he'd made at Janet's party, but in private it was even crueler. This wasn't a slip of the tongue or a moment of frustration. This was how he truly saw me. I kept reading, my hands trembling as I discovered email after email discussing strategies and tactics for the divorce. There were asset evaluations I'd never heard of, accounts I didn't know existed, and detailed plans for how to present me as an unemployable dependent who deserved minimal support. The last email in the stack was the most chilling. It was from James Peterson to Rob, sent yesterday. Everything is ready for tomorrow. The papers are signed and filed. Once you present them to Diana, we can begin formal proceedings. Given her lack of legal representation and financial knowledge, this should proceed smoothly in our favor. Her lack of legal representation. They were counting on me being too shocked, too unprepared, too financially ignorant to fight back. They had planned this entire ambush, assuming I would simply accept whatever they decided I was worth. But buried in all this devastating information was something else. Detailed records of our true financial situation, properties I didn't know about, investment accounts with substantial balances, business assets that had been carefully hidden from me. Rob wasn't just leaving me, he was stealing from me while he did it. I found a list in Rob's handwriting titled Pre-Divorce Asset Protection, which included transferring ownership of our rental properties to his brother's name, moving money to accounts in his business partner's name, and even selling some investments and claiming the money had been lost in bad deals. The man I had loved and trusted for 20 years hadn't just planned to divorce me. He had been systematically stealing our marital assets and preparing to leave me with nothing. Every signature he'd asked me for, every paper he'd had me sign for tax purposes, had been part of a carefully orchestrated plan to rob me of my fair share of everything we'd built together. But Rob had made one crucial mistake. In his arrogance, in his certainty that I was too naive and trusting to ever fight back, he had documented everything. Every hidden asset, every transferred property, every illegal maneuver was right here in black and white. For the first time since opening that box, I felt something other than devastation. I felt a spark of something I hadn't experienced in months. Power. Rob thought he was playing chess while I was playing checkers. He had no idea that he'd just handed me all the pieces I needed to win. The golden retriever was about to bite back. I don't know how long I sat at that dining room table, surrounded by the evidence of my husband's betrayal. The grandfather clock in our hallway chimed noon, then 1 o'clock, then 2. The candles had burned out completely, leaving trails of wax on our wedding china. The breakfast I'd made with such love had congealed into something unrecognizable. But I barely noticed any of it because my entire world had shifted on its axis. At some point, muscle memory took over. I found myself reaching for my phone and dialing my sister Linda's number. She lived 20 minutes away, and we talked almost every day, but I hadn't told her about the growing problems in my marriage. I'd been too ashamed, too invested in maintaining the illusion that everything was perfect. "Diana," Linda's voice was immediately concerned. "You sound strange. What's wrong? Can you come over?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper.
Rob
Gave me divorce papers for our anniversary." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that I thought the call had dropped. Then Linda's voice came back, fierce and protective in a way I'd forgotten she could be. "I'm on my way.
Don't do anything. Don't sign anything.
Don't even talk to him until I get there." While I waited for Linda, I walked through our house like a stranger seeing it for the first time. Every room told the story of a woman who had poured her entire identity into being the perfect wife and mother. The living room, with its carefully arranged family photos, was where I'd spent countless hours helping our children with homework while Rob worked late. The kitchen was where I'd cooked thousands of meals, packed thousands of lunches, and celebrated every birthday and holiday. The master bedroom was where I'd laid out Rob's clothes every morning and waited up for him every night. Who was I outside of these roles? For 20 years, I defined myself entirely through my relationships with other people, Rob's wife, Sarah, and Marcus's mother, the woman who made everything work smoothly behind the scenes. I'd been so busy being everything to everyone else that I'd forgotten I was supposed to be someone on my own. When Linda arrived, she took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug that nearly broke me all over again. My older sister had always been the stronger one, the one who spoke her mind and refused to accept less than she deserved. Growing up, I'd admired her fierce independence, though somewhere along the way, I'd convinced myself that my path, the devoted wife and mother, was just as valuable.
"Show me," she said simply.
I led her to the dining room and watched her face as she read through the divorce papers and the hidden emails. Her expression grew darker with each page, and I could see her hands clenching into fists. "Diana," she said finally, looking up at me with a mixture of fury and heartbreak. How long has he been treating you like this? I don't know, I answered honestly. It's been getting worse. But I kept making excuses. I thought if I just tried harder, if I could be better. Stop. Linda's voice was sharp. This isn't about you not being good enough. This is about Rob being a manipulative, selfish man who's been systematically tearing you down so you wouldn't fight back when he did this. Her words hit me like a revelation. All those months of criticism, of being made to feel inadequate, of having my confidence slowly eroded, it hadn't been random. It had been deliberate. Rob had been conditioning me to accept whatever he decided I was worth. Linda, I don't know who I am anymore, I admitted, the words tumbling out in a rush. I've been Mrs. Robert Mitchell for so long that I don't remember how to be just Diana. I don't have a career. I don't have my own money. I don't even have my own opinions about most things. What if he's right? What if I am just a dependent golden retriever who can't survive on her own? Linda grabbed my shoulders and looked me directly in the eyes. Do you remember what you were like before Rob? Do you remember Diana Hayes? The woman who could command a classroom of 38-year-olds? The woman who organized the entire school fundraiser that raised $50,000? The woman who drove across 3 states by herself to help me when I was going through my divorce. I blinked, startled. I had forgotten that woman. She felt like someone from a past life, someone who had existed before I became consumed with being the perfect wife. That woman is still in there, Linda continued. Rob didn't erase her. He just convinced her to hide. But she's been there all along, managing a household, raising children, supporting a business. You think those aren't skills? You think organizing a family and a home for 20 years didn't require intelligence and competence and strength? For the first time in months, I felt something stirring inside me that wasn't fear or self-doubt. It was recognition. Linda was right. I had been someone before Rob, and that someone had been capable, strong, and independent. I've been waiting for this call for 2 years, Linda said quietly. I've watched him chip away at you bit by bit, and I've been praying you'd wake up before it was too late. You saw this coming, Diana. Everyone saw this coming except you. The way he talked to you, the way he dismissed you, the way he made you smaller and smaller until you nearly disappeared. Linda's voice was gentle now. But here's what Rob doesn't know. You're not the same woman you were 20 years ago. You're stronger now, more experienced, and you have something he doesn't. What's that? I asked. Linda smiled, and for the first time all day, I felt a spark of hope. You have the truth, and you have people who love you enough to help you fight for what you deserve. I looked around our dining room one more time at the cold breakfast, the burned-out candles, the photos of a marriage that had apparently been dying while I was trying to keep it alive. But for the first time, I wasn't seeing the end of my story. I was seeing the beginning. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in 20 years. I woke up with a plan that had nothing to do with taking care of anyone else. While Rob showered, humming tunelessly as if he hadn't just destroyed our marriage the day before, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a yellow legal pad, methodically writing down everything I needed to do. The first item on my list was simple but revolutionary: get my own bank account. I'd been thinking about Linda's words all night. The woman who could organize a school fundraiser, manage a household, raise children, and coordinate Rob's business calls and client meetings was perfectly capable of managing her own finances. She'd just forgotten how to do it. After Rob left for work, treating me with the same casual indifference he'd shown for months, I drove to the First National Bank downtown. I chose a branch I'd never been to before, where no one knew me as Mrs. Mitchell or Rob's wife. I wanted to walk in as Diana Hayes and see who that person could become. I'd like to open a checking account, I told the young banker, a woman about Sarah's age with kind eyes and a professional smile. Of course. Will this be a joint account with your husband? No, I said, and the word felt like a declaration of independence. This is just for me. I deposited the $847 I'd been saving in a coffee can in our pantry. Money I'd been squirreling away from grocery budgets and small cash gifts from the kids. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For the first time in decades, I had money that Rob couldn't touch, couldn't monitor, couldn't control. My next stop was the public library. I'd always loved libraries. but I hadn't been to one in years, except to return the children's books when they were younger. Now, I sat at a computer terminal and began researching divorce law in our state. I learned about community property, spousal support, and asset division. I discovered that in our state, I was entitled to half of everything we'd acquired during our marriage, regardless of whose name was on the accounts. Most importantly, I learned that hiding assets during divorce proceedings was illegal. Everything Rob had done, transferring properties to his brother, moving money to business partner accounts, selling investments without my knowledge, could land him in serious legal trouble. I printed out pages of information and slipped them into a folder I'd bought at the dollar store. No expensive briefcase, no fancy organizer, just a simple manila folder that would fit in my purse without drawing attention. That afternoon, I did something else I hadn't done in years. I called my old friend Margaret from my teaching days. We'd lost touch when I stopped working, the way friendships sometimes fade when your lives take different paths. But Margaret had become a school principal, and I knew she understood systems, procedures, and how to navigate complex situations. "Diana Hayes," she exclaimed when she heard my voice. "I was just thinking about you the other day. How are you?" "I'm getting divorced," I said, surprising myself with how matter-of-fact I sounded, "and I need to figure out how to rebuild my life." There was no judgment in Margaret's voice, only warm support. "What can I do to help?" "I need to get back into teaching. I know it's been 20 years, but do you think it's possible?" "Absolutely possible," Margaret said without hesitation. "The district is desperate for experienced teachers, especially with your background. You'll need to take some continuing education courses to renew your certification. But Diana, you are one of the best teachers I ever worked with. That doesn't just disappear." I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Pride in my own abilities. I wasn't just Rob's wife or the kid's mother. I was Diana Hayes, educator. And that identity had value independent of my marriage. Over the next few weeks, I established a routine that Rob never noticed. While he was at work, I visited lawyers' offices, not to hire them yet, but to gather information about consultations and fees. I researched continuing education programs for teachers. I even looked at small apartments online, just to understand my options. Most importantly, I began documenting everything. I photographed the emails Rob had hidden in the anniversary box before returning them to their hiding place. I made copies of financial documents I found around the house. I started a journal recording not just our conversations, but also his behaviors, his absences, his attitudes, building a record of the marriage I'd been too devoted to see clearly. The strangest part was how normal everything appeared on the surface. I still made Rob's coffee every morning, still cooked dinner, still maintained our household routines. But underneath, I was systematically preparing for a war he didn't know was coming. Rob had counted on my shock, my dependence, my lack of preparation to make his divorce proceedings smooth and profitable. He had no idea that while he was congratulating himself on his clever strategy, I was building a counter-strategy of my own. Every morning when I made his coffee, I thought about the woman in those emails, the unemployable dependent who signed whatever he put in front of her. That woman was disappearing one careful step at a time, and in her place was someone Rob had never met, Diana Hayes, the woman who was going to fight for her future. The golden retriever was learning to hunt. The first crack in Rob's confidence appeared 3 weeks after he'd given me the divorce papers. We were sitting at our kitchen table on a Thursday evening, the same table where he'd planned my financial destruction, though he didn't know I was aware of that. I was calmly eating the lasagna I'd made for dinner while he scrolled through his phone, probably texting with his lawyer or whoever else was part of his carefully orchestrated plan. "So," he said, not looking up from his screen, "have you had time to think about what we discussed about moving forward with the divorce?" I took a measured bite of my lasagna, chewed thoughtfully, and swallowed before responding. The old Diana would have immediately started crying, would have begged him to reconsider, would have asked what she'd done wrong. The new Diana had learned the power of silence. "I think," I said slowly, "that we should both have proper legal representation before we discuss anything further." Rob's head snapped up from his phone. "Legal representation? Diana, that's just going to complicate things unnecessarily. We can work this out between ourselves like civilized adults." "Can we?" I asked, meeting his eyes directly. Because I've been thinking about all the papers you've had me sign over the years. All those documents you said were for taxes or business purposes. I'd like to have a lawyer review those before I agree to anything. The color drained from Rob's face so quickly that I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Diana, those were routine business documents. There's nothing to review. Then you won't mind if my attorney takes a look? Just to make sure I understand our financial situation completely. Your attorney? Rob's voice cracked slightly on the words. Diana, attorneys are expensive. We don't need to waste money on. I interrupted gently. You've been planning this divorce for months. You have an attorney. Why shouldn't I have one, too? The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically see the wheels turning in his head as he tried to figure out how I knew about his timeline, how much I might have discovered. For 20 years, Rob had been able to read me like an open book. Now, for the first time, I was a mystery to him. I haven't been planning anything for months, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Was it? I asked, tilting my head as if genuinely curious. Because I've been wondering about some things like why you've been so secretive with your phone lately, or why you've been working late so many nights, or why you suddenly started criticizing everything I do. Rob's jaw tightened. I haven't been criticizing you. Haven't you? I stood up and began clearing the dinner plates, moving with the same calm efficiency I'd perfected over 20 years. The burnt toast, the 2 strong coffees, the dramatic anniversary plans. Those comments just came from nowhere. Diana, you're being paranoid. I paused at the sink, looking out the window at the garden I'd tended for 2 decades. You know what's interesting, Rob? Yesterday, I was cleaning out the junk drawer, and I found some old bank statements. Statements from accounts I didn't know we had. The lie came so easily that it surprised me. But I watched Rob's reflection in the window, saw him stiffen in his chair, saw his hand unconsciously move to his phone as if he wanted to make a call. Those are business accounts, he said quickly. You don't need to worry about those. Oh, I'm not worried, I said, turning back to face him with a smile. I'm just curious. After 20 years of marriage, I thought I knew about all our finances, but apparently there's a lot I don't know. Rob stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair. I need to make some phone calls. Of course you do, I said pleasantly. Don't let me keep you. As he headed toward his office, I called after him. Oh, and Rob, when you talk to your lawyer, you might want to mention that I'll be getting my own representation just so he can prepare accordingly. Rob stopped dead in the hallway. Diana, this doesn't have to be adversarial. We can work this out amicably. I hope we can, I said, loading dishes into the dishwasher with practiced ease. But just in case we can't, I want to make sure I understand all my options. That night, I heard Rob on the phone in his office until nearly midnight. His voice was agitated, though I couldn't make out the words through the closed door. The next morning, he was unusually attentive at breakfast, complimenting my coffee and asking about my plans for the day. I was thinking, he said as I packed his lunch, maybe we should take some time to really talk about our future. Maybe go to counseling, see if we can work things out. I looked at him with genuine surprise. Rob, you gave me divorce papers 3 weeks ago on our anniversary. I know, but maybe I was hasty. Maybe we should try to save our marriage. Maybe, I said, handing him his lunch bag. But first, I think we both need to be completely honest about where we stand financially and otherwise. The panic in his eyes was barely concealed. What do you mean? I mean, if we're going to rebuild our marriage, it has to be on a foundation of truth, complete transparency about everything. I smiled sweetly, don't you think? Rob left for work without his usual goodbye kiss, and I knew that somewhere in the city, phones were ringing and emergency meetings were being scheduled. The man who had so carefully planned my downfall was now scrambling to figure out how much his wife actually knew. The answer was enough. And every day I was learning more. For the first time in our marriage, Rob Mitchell was afraid of his wife. And I was just getting started. The meeting was scheduled for a Wednesday morning in a glass-walled conference room that felt more like an aquarium than a place where lives were decided. I'd chosen James Morrison as my attorney after interviewing 3 different lawyers, finally settling on a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who reminded me of my sister, Linda, direct, no-nonsense, and unimpressed by men who thought they could manipulate the system. Mrs. Mitchell, James said as I sat across from her mahogany desk during our first consultation. I've reviewed the preliminary documents you brought me, and I have to say, your husband has made some significant errors in judgment. She spread Rob's divorce papers across her desk like evidence at a crime scene. His filing assumes you'll accept minimal spousal support because you've been financially dependent during your marriage. But what he's failed to account for is your contribution to building his business. What do you mean? You said you handled his phone calls, managed his schedule, did his bookkeeping, even sat in on client meetings. That's not being financially dependent. That's being an unpaid business partner. In our state, that entitles you to a significant portion of the business assets. I felt something flutter in my chest. Not fear this time, but hope. More importantly, James continued, the evidence you've provided about hidden assets is going to create serious legal problems for your husband. Asset concealment during divorce proceedings is illegal, and the penalties can be severe. Now, sitting in that conference room with both our attorneys present, I watched Rob's confidence crumble in real time. He'd arrived looking smug and self-assured, probably expecting to steamroll over his unemployable wife and her presumably inexperienced lawyer. The moment James began laying out our case, his expression changed completely. Let's start with the business assets, James said, opening a thick folder. Mitchell and Sons Construction, which Mrs. Mitchell helped build and operate for 20 years without compensation. Rob's attorney, a thin man named Peterson, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, cleared his throat nervously. My client maintains that Mrs. Mitchell had no formal role in the business. Really? James smiled coldly. Because we have testimony from multiple clients stating that Mrs. Mitchell coordinated their projects, managed scheduling conflicts, and even negotiated payment terms. We also have phone records showing hundreds of business-related calls to and from the Mitchell residence. I watched Rob's face as the reality of the situation sank in. He'd been so focused on hiding assets that he'd never considered how his attempts to minimize my contributions would backfire. Furthermore, James continued, we have evidence of systematic asset concealment that began 4 months before Mr. Mitchell filed for divorce. She placed a stack of documents on the table, copies of the emails Rob had hidden in the anniversary box, bank records I'd photographed, property transfer documents I discovered through my research. The Riverside rental property transferred to your brother, Mark, James read aloud. The investment account moved to your business partner's name. The sale of stock portfolio with proceeds moved to a private account. Would you like me to continue? Peterson was frantically scribbling notes, sweat visible on his forehead. Rob sat frozen, staring at the evidence of his own carefully planned deception spread across the table. How did you? Rob started, then stopped himself. How did I what, Rob? I asked quietly. It was the first time I'd spoken since entering the room, and my voice was steady, controlled. How did I find out about the assets you've been hiding? How did I discover the emails you wrote about me? How did I learn about the meetings you've been having for months while I planned our anniversary celebration? Rob's face had gone completely pale. Diana, I can explain. Can you? I leaned forward slightly, maintaining eye contact. Can you explain calling me a golden retriever in writing? Can you explain planning to leave me with nothing after 20 years of building a life together? Can you explain giving me divorce papers and a gift box on our anniversary? The silence in the room was absolute. Even Peterson had stopped writing. Mrs. Mitchell, James said, her voice cutting through the tension. Would you like to present your settlement terms? I nodded, feeling a strange calm settle over me. This was it, the moment I'd been preparing for, the moment where I reclaimed my voice after months of being silenced. I want 50% of all marital assets, including the hidden ones. I began, my voice growing stronger with each word. I want spousal support calculated on Rob's actual income, not the reduced figure he's been reporting. I want half the value of Mitchell and Sons Construction, which I helped build with 20 years of unpaid labor. Rob finally found his voice. Diana, be reasonable. You can't just. I'm not finished, I said firmly, and Rob actually flinched. I also want compensation for emotional distress, given the deliberate and systematic way you planned this betrayal while allowing me to believe our marriage was intact. James smiled approvingly. And if Mr. Mitchell doesn't agree to these terms? I looked directly at my husband, this man I'd loved, supported, and sacrificed for, who had repaid my devotion with calculated cruelty. Then we go to court, and a judge decides how much someone should pay for 20 years of fraud, both financial and emotional. Rob's attorney whispered urgently in his ear. Peterson looked like he was delivering very bad news. We'll need time to review these terms, Peterson said finally. Of course, James replied smoothly. You have until Friday. After that, we file for immediate asset freezing and begin criminal proceedings for the hidden accounts. As we gathered our papers to leave, Rob grabbed my arm. Diana, wait. Can't we talk about this privately? I looked down at his hand on my arm. The same hand that had signed divorce papers in secret, that had transferred our assets to hidden accounts, that had written those cruel emails about the woman who loved him. Rob, I said quietly, you had months to talk to me privately. You chose to talk to your lawyer instead. Now I'm choosing to do the same. The golden retriever had learned to bite, and Rob Mitchell was about to find out just how sharp my teeth could be. 2 weeks after our conference room confrontation, I was sitting in my new apartment, a bright, airy one-bedroom place that overlooked the park where I used to take our children when they were small, when James called with news that made me set down my coffee cup with shaking hands. Diana, you need to sit down for this, she said, and I could hear the barely contained excitement in her voice. I'm already sitting, I replied, though my heart had started racing. We just received a call from the IRS. They're opening an investigation into Rob's business practices based on the evidence we provided. Apparently, the asset hiding wasn't just about the divorce. It's been going on for years. Tax evasion, unreported income, fraudulent business deductions. This is federal. The room seemed to tilt around me. What does that mean? It means your husband is facing criminal charges. And it means that everything he tried to hide from you, he also tried to hide from the government. The penalties for tax fraud are severe, Diana. We're talking substantial fines, possible prison time, and complete asset forfeiture. I stared out my window at the park below, watching children play on the swings where Sarah and Marcus had once laughed and shouted. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I was building our life, creating memories, raising our children, Rob had been building a house of cards that was finally collapsing. There's more, James continued. Remember that business partner he transferred assets to? Well, it turns out that was fraudulent, too. The IRS considers those transactions to be attempts to evade legitimate tax obligations. And the rental properties he signed over to his brother, those transfers are being reversed. I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. This wasn't how I'd wanted to win. I'd wanted justice, yes, but I'd never imagined it would come in the form of federal investigators dismantling the business I'd helped him build. How did they find out so quickly? I asked. Anonymous tip, James said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Someone provided them with very detailed documentation of the hidden assets and fraudulent transfers. I didn't need to ask who. Linda had connections everywhere from her years working in the county clerk's office. My sister had always said that justice delayed was justice denied. 3 days later, I watched from my apartment window as FBI agents loaded boxes from Rob's office into unmarked vans. The local news covered it as a routine white-collar crime investigation, but I knew better. This was 20 years of lies finally coming to light. Rob called me that evening, his voice shaking with panic and rage. Diana, what have you done? I haven't done anything, Rob, I said calmly, curled up on my new sofa with a cup of tea. I simply provided accurate information about our marital assets to my attorney. What you did with that information was illegal. What I did was tell the truth. You've destroyed everything. The business, my reputation, our children's inheritance. No, I interrupted, my voice sharp for the first time. You destroyed everything. I just refuse to help you cover it up anymore. The final blow came 2 weeks later during mediation. Rob, looking haggard and defeated, sat next to Peterson as James laid out the new reality. Given the federal investigation and the asset recovery proceedings, James announced, Mrs. Mitchell is now entitled to significantly more than we originally requested. The government had frozen all of Rob's accounts pending their investigation. The hidden properties were being returned to the marital estate. The business was under federal oversight. Everything Rob had worked so hard to steal from me was being handed back with interest. Your Honor, I addressed the mediator directly. I want to be clear about something. I didn't seek this outcome out of revenge. I sought it out of justice. For 20 years, I supported a man who was systematically stealing from our partnership while convincing me I was worthless without him. Rob couldn't even look at me. I'm not the same woman who opened that anniversary box 6 months ago. I continued. That woman believed her worth was determined by how well she served others. This woman knows her worth is determined by how well she serves herself. The final settlement was more than I'd ever dreamed possible. Not just financially, though the amount was substantial, but emotionally. I'd proven to myself that the woman Rob had tried to erase was not only still there, but stronger than ever. As we left the courthouse, Rob made one last desperate attempt.
Ziana, I'm sorry.
I know I made mistakes, but, Rob, I said, turning to face him one final time. You didn't make mistakes. You made choices. Every signature, every hidden account, every cruel comment. Those were choices. And now you get to live with the consequences of those choices, just like I get to live with the consequences of mine. The best consequence? I was finally free to discover who Diana Hayes could become when she stopped trying to be the perfect Mrs. Mitchell. The golden retriever had not only learned to bite, she'd learned to soar. Months had passed since the divorce was finalized when my phone rang on a rainy Thursday evening in November. I was grading papers at my kitchen table. Yes, I was teaching again, 3rd grade at Riverside Elementary, and loving every minute of it. When I saw Rob's name on the caller ID, I stared at it for a moment, surprised by how little I felt. No anger, no sadness, just a mild curiosity about what could possibly motivate him to call me now. Hello, Rob, I said, setting down my red pen and pushing my reading glasses up on my head. Diana. His voice sounded different, smaller somehow, less certain than the man who had once commanded every conversation. How are you? I'm well, thank you. How can I help you? There was a long pause, and I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. In the background, I caught the sound of a television and what might have been a microwave beeping. He was living in a studio apartment now. I'd heard through the grapevine, working for someone else's construction company while the IRS slowly dismantled the business he'd spent 20 years building. I've been thinking, he said finally, about us, about what happened, Diana. I made a terrible mistake. I leaned back in my chair, genuinely curious where this conversation was heading. Which mistake are you referring to, Rob? There were quite a few. All of it. The divorce, the way I treated you, the things I said. His voice cracked slightly. I miss us, Diana. I miss you. I miss our life together. For a moment, I was transported back to our kitchen table, to the woman who would have given anything to hear those words 6 months earlier. That woman would have cried with relief, would have asked what she could do to fix things, would have opened her arms and her heart without question. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Rob, I said gently, do you miss me? Or do you miss the woman who made your life easier? What do you mean? I mean, do you miss Diana Hayes, the person? Or do you miss having someone to make your coffee, pack your lunches, handle your schedule, and ask nothing for herself in return? Another long pause. That's not fair, is it? I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the street where I'd chosen to build my new life. For 20 years, I thought love meant making myself smaller so you could feel bigger. I thought partnership meant giving up my dreams so you could achieve yours. I thought marriage meant disappearing into someone else's life until I forgot I'd ever had my own. Diana, I know I wasn't perfect. Rob, you weren't imperfect. You were calculating. You spent months planning to leave me with nothing while I planned anniversary celebrations. You wrote emails calling me a golden retriever while I wrote love notes for your lunch bag. You transferred our assets to hidden accounts while I trusted you with my entire future. I could hear him crying now. Soft sobs that once would have broken my heart. Now they just made me sad. Not for us, but for the time we'd both wasted. I was scared, he said through his tears. Scared of growing old. Scared of being ordinary. Scared of admitting that our life wasn't exciting anymore. I thought if I could start over with someone new, someone younger, I could feel young again. And did you? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The divorce settlement had revealed Rob's affair with his 32-year-old secretary, a relationship that had ended the moment his legal troubles began. No, it was all fantasy.
You were real, Diana.
Our life was real. What we built together was real. Yes, it was real, I agreed. But it wasn't honest, and it wasn't equal. I loved you completely, Rob. But you only loved the parts of me that served your purposes. My doorbell rang, and I glanced toward the front door. Rob, I need to go. Someone's here. Diana, wait. Please, can we try again? Can we go to counseling? Work on rebuilding what we had? I opened my front door to find my daughter Sarah standing on my porch, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing the bright smile that had been lighting up my world since she was born. She'd driven down from Chicago to spend the weekend with me, something that had become a monthly tradition since the divorce. Hold on, I told Rob, then covered the phone with my hand.
Come in.
I'm just finishing a call. Sarah kissed my cheek and set the coffee on my counter, giving me a questioning look. I mouthed, your father, and watched her expression shift to protective concern. Rob, I said, returning to the phone, I need you to understand something. I'm not angry with you anymore. I've forgiven you, not for your sake, but for mine. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And it certainly doesn't mean going backward. But we could start fresh. We could. No, we couldn't because you haven't changed, Rob. You're not calling because you've realized you love me. You're calling because your other options didn't work out. And you're lonely. Sarah was watching me with obvious pride. And I realized she was seeing something she'd never seen before, her mother standing firmly in her own truth. The woman you married doesn't exist anymore, I continued. She disappeared the day you handed me those divorce papers. In her place is someone you never bothered to meet. Diana Hayes, who has her own apartment, her own career, her own bank account, and her own opinions about what she deserves. Diana, please. I hope you find happiness, Rob.
I genuinely do.
But you're not going to find it by trying to resurrect something you spent years systematically destroying. After I hung up, Sarah handed me one of the coffees and studied my face. How do you feel? I thought about it for a moment, surprised by the answer.
Free.
For the first time in 20 years, I feel completely free. Good, Sarah said, raising her coffee cup in a mock toast. Because the woman you've become is pretty amazing. I'd hate to see her disappear again. We clinked cups, and I realized my daughter was right. The woman I'd become wasn't someone I wanted to trade for the woman I used to be, no matter how much easier that might have seemed. Some bridges are meant to be rebuilt. Sometimes you just appreciate the view from the other side. It's been 18 months since that terrible, beautiful anniversary morning, and I'm sitting in my garden apartment on a Saturday afternoon in early spring, watching the daffodils I planted last fall push their way through the soil. There's something profoundly satisfying about watching things grow that you've planted with your own hands in soil that belongs to you in a space you've created for yourself. My sister Linda is here for our weekly coffee date, a tradition that started when I was at my lowest and has continued because these Saturday afternoons have become sacred to both of us. She's sitting in the wicker chair I bought at a garage sale, reading aloud from a letter our mother sent from Florida, where she's been spending the winter with our Aunt Patricia. Mom says to tell you she's proud of how you've handled everything, Linda reads, looking up at me over her reading glasses. She also says she never liked Rob anyway and was just waiting for you to figure it out. I laugh, the kind of genuine laughter that had been missing from my life for years without my realizing it. Of course she was. Mom always sees through people before the rest of us catch up. Do you ever regret it? Linda asks, folding the letter and setting it aside. The divorce, the fight, all of it. I consider the question seriously, The way I've learned to consider all questions since my world was turned upside down. A year ago, I would have given a quick, reassuring answer designed to make everyone comfortable. Now, I think about what I actually feel, not what I think I should feel. I regret wasting so many years trying to save something that was already dead. I say finally. I regret not trusting my instinct sooner. I regret teaching my children that love means making yourself smaller for someone else's comfort. I pause. Watching a cardinal land on the bird feeder, I hung outside my kitchen window. But I don't regret the divorce itself. It didn't just end my marriage, it saved my life. Linda nods, understanding in the way that only someone who's watched you nearly disappear can understand. You're different now. Not just stronger, but more present. Like you're actually here, instead of performing being here.
She's right.
The woman who lived in that house with Rob was always performing. The perfect wife, the devoted mother, the supportive partner. She was so busy being what everyone needed that she forgot to be who she was. I'd been living my life like a guest in someone else's story. Grateful to be included, but never daring to ask for a speaking role. My phone buzzes with a text from Sarah. Can't wait to see your classroom set up next week. Marcus and I are so proud of you, Mom. Both of my children have been incredibly supportive throughout this entire ordeal. But more than that, they've seemed relieved, as if they'd been watching me disappear, too, and were grateful to have their real mother back. I picked up the framed photo sitting on my coffee table, a picture from my first day back in the classroom 6 months ago. I'm standing in front of a bulletin board covered with my students' artwork, my arms crossed, smiling genuinely at the camera. I look happy in a way I hadn't looked in years. But more than that, I look like myself. Not Rob's wife or the children's mother, but Diana Hayes, third-grade teacher, a woman who matters in her own right. The legal settlement provided me with more financial security than I'd ever had as a married woman. But the real victory wasn't monetary. It was discovering that the woman Rob had systematically tried to erase was not only still there, but had been getting stronger all along, waiting for her chance to emerge. I got a call from Rob yesterday, I tell Linda, because I've learned the importance of sharing the difficult conversations as well as the easy ones.
Oh.
Linda's voice is carefully neutral, but I can see her protective instincts kicking in. He wanted to know if I'd been seeing anyone. Can you believe that? As if my romantic life is still any of his business. What did you tell him? I told him the truth. That I'm dating someone wonderful. Someone who thinks my opinions are interesting. Who loves my dramatic enthusiasm for celebrating small moments. Who actually listens when I talk. Linda grins. David from the school district. David from the school district, I confirm, feeling warmth spread through my chest at the mention of his name. David, who laughs at my terrible jokes and brings me coffee during my lunch breaks and has never once made me feel like I'm too much of anything. But more importantly, I continue, I told Rob that whether I'm dating someone or not isn't the point.
The point is that I'm happy.
Really genuinely happy in a way I'd forgotten was possible. I look around my small apartment, so different from the house I'd thought was my forever home. Every piece of furniture, here I chose myself. Every color on the walls I picked because I liked it. Every book on the shelves I actually wanted to read. It's smaller than what I had before, but it's entirely mine. You know what the strangest thing is? I say to Linda, I used to think that box was the worst gift I'd ever received, but now I think it might have been the best. How do you figure? I stand up and walk to my kitchen window, looking out at the garden plot where I'm planning to grow tomatoes this summer, because it forced me to discover who I was when I wasn't busy being who everyone needed me to be. It gave me back Diana Hayes, a woman I'd almost forgotten existed. The afternoon sun is streaming through my windows, warming the space I've created for myself. Tomorrow, I'll go to my classroom and teach children how to read, how to think, how to question the world around them. I'll come home to an apartment that reflects my taste, my choices, my life. I'll make plans that serve my interests, not someone else's agenda. That anniversary box was supposed to be my ending, the final chapter of a story where I was never the main character. Instead, it became the first page of a new story. One where I'm not just present, but essential. Not just surviving, but thriving. Sometimes the worst gift you receive becomes the best thing that ever happened to you. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to discover what you actually need. Sometimes the person you're meant to become is hidden inside the person you've been pretending to be, just waiting for the right moment to break free. I am Diana Hayes. I am a teacher, a mother, a sister, a friend. I am a woman who plants gardens and grades papers and laughs too loudly at movies. I am someone who matters, not because of who I'm married to or how well I serve others, but because I exist. Because I choose to exist fully, authentically, unapologetically, and that I've learned is more than enough. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.